Hello everyone and welcome back into the GSMC Dead Ball Sports Podcast. Before we get into our second segment of today's show, I do want to remind you, as always, that if you want to contribute and interact with the show a little bit more directly, consider making yourselves available to the Super Chat, Super Thanks, and Super Stickers features here on YouTube, as well as our website, gsmcspodcast.net, to better contribute and interact, like I say, with the show. Any opinions, feedback, input, even tips and donations that you leave are genuinely appreciated by all concerned, not just me at my own show, but others around the network as well. Go check them out as well. But ultimately just makes our shows that much better hearing from you, our faithful audience. But without further ado, let's get into our second off-season guide of the day, talking about a divisional round participant in the NFC, the Los Angeles Rams. Truly a remarkable season, a remarkable story. Obviously, starting off the season decimated by injuries, finding themselves at 1-4. Then, mid-season, getting a lot of players back, making a playoff push, ultimately beating out the Seattle Seahawks for the NFC West title. And then, shocking the Minnesota Vikings, even though they were the home team. Minnesota Vikings obviously came in with 14 wins in the season, shocking them at home. Well, not necessarily home, which is even more shocking, as they had to move the game from Arizona due to the LA wildfires. But ultimately, a truly incredible story. But now more than ever, this LA Rams team and its future is looking very murky, especially offensively. Obviously, we already know the news about Cooper Kupp. He's definitely going to be traded, but for who, it's going to be up for debate, and we're going to be talking about this for weeks to come if it doesn't get done immediately. But then as well, you look at this offensive line. You look at the future of potentially a guy like Matthew Stafford, who may only have a couple more good years in him. You look potentially at one of the only weaknesses on this defense, the secondary, and you ask a lot of questions about how this team is going to bolster those areas of need. But ultimately, it's more so about understanding the market and the value of some of the players you already have if you're the LA Rams in terms of how you go into this offseason. You already set the standard for a guy like Cooper Kupp, saying that he probably is going to be traded, most likely is going to be traded, and you told him as such. But now you have to focus on retaining some guys that you definitely don't want to lose, but also in areas that you can't afford to either, while also trying to bolster areas of need. Like I said, potentially a backup QB who can learn under Stafford for a little bit and potentially become your starter. And then the secondary, where yes, Cameron Kinchens was a nice find in the draft, but still needs a little bit of help at the cornerback spots. Without further ado, let's jump right into my analysis of what should happen for the Rams offseason to be a success. Starting out, like I said, not just with Matthew Stafford and Cooper Kupp, whose futures are very much up in the air. Not just Kupp's, but Stafford's as well. The offensive line, because the offensive line was decimated by injuries throughout the entire season. None more so than a guy like Rob Havenstein, who's a stalwart tackle in this offensive line. Injured his shoulder before week 17, ultimately didn't play as much as he wanted to in the postseason. But this is the last year, in fact, a non-guaranteed year left on his contract, and as well as Alaric Jackson, his fellow tackle, becoming a free agent. And then you have a guy in Bo Limmer who ultimately beat out a guy who we were really hoping to improve this season in Jonah Jackson. And now you have a very, very, very messy conundrum to deal with on your offensive line. The only good thing about this offense potentially is the fact that even if Cooper Kupp leaves and potentially a couple of these old linemen leave, you still have a guy like Puka Nacua. But that's about the only hope you have if this starts to get a little bit messy and frustrating and complicated for LA. Because like I said, Alaric Jackson probably is the one guy you want to keep. He's the youngest of this bunch, and he played this season actually on a tender. So I do feel like he's going to be the hardest to sign because he might want to be testing the market where he can get more high-end money as an offensive tackle. But I do think it's vital and integral for this team to keep as many O-linemen there as possible. And even though it's probably going to be the toughest to keep Alaric Jackson, he's the guy who's going to set the standard for you up front for years to come. And then, in terms of another group of need, maybe a more surprising group of need. How about this Rams secondary, right? We talk about how they improved this defensive front with guys like Jared Verse and Braden Fisk filling the shoes of Aaron Donald, not necessarily as individual players, but as kind of more of a collective team effort. But in the secondary, there are not that many pieces that you can build around outside of a guy like Cameron Kinchens, who was a pleasant surprise coming in the latter stages, I believe, of the 5th round. I was actually shocked he fell that far. He was one of the more intriguing safeties in that year's draft. But ultimately, a nice pleasant surprise, but you need to continue to supplement that because the cornerback room was the most tested in the league, as they gave up 11.6 yards per reception. That was actually the 7th worst in the league last year. And if I'm looking at the breakout of the draft, the Rams are always going to be a team that's going to be picking at the low end of round 1. If I want to set the precedent for trying to develop young talent in my defense, and I'm analyzing the secondary and saying that we found a guy like Cameron Kinchens, how can we build on this? Then a guy like Maxwell Hairston, the cornerback position coming out of Kentucky, could be an interesting addition. He's not necessarily being profiled as a low round 1 guy. I feel like he's going to be more of an early day 2 guy, but I do think that as an instinctive guy with elite ball skills who finished with 5 pass breakups last year, I do think that he could be someone that they build around, especially if Cameron Kinchens continues to improve defensively as well. But ultimately, if I'm the Rams, I focus in on this offense, right? Because there are a lot of positives here. Because you saw when both Kupp and Nacua went down, the talent and depth you might have in this wide receiver room should one of them have left. And even during the season when there were talks of Kupp and potentially Stafford being traded mid-season, I feel like there was still optimism within the Rams about how some of these receivers were playing. Guys like Robinson, guys like Whittington potentially be stepping up, should Kupp be traded. And now that it's becoming ever more real that Kupp is going to be traded, I do think that the Rams feel like they can compensate for it a little bit more, knowing what they have beyond Puka Nacua in the depth chart. So if I'm the Rams, I feel like if I can potentially get a little bit of draft capital outside of trading Cooper Kupp, then I feel like I can play around a little bit in this year's draft, maybe find a couple more hidden gems like they did last year, and bolster both sides of the football, especially offensively, where this tackle class is very deep, and maybe they want to take a chance if Jackson ends up going. If they do want to continue to improve the secondary, find more hidden gems in that department, then that's a route they could go, and Hairston could be a potentially eyebrow-raising choice that they are ambitious about. Or even picking a wide receiver themselves. Maybe this will come in the latter stages of the rounds, but ultimately the Rams can set themselves up nicely if they get a nice little package for Cooper Kupp. I'm not expecting a huge package, maybe a couple round 2 picks, maybe even a round 3, 4 pick in this package, but ultimately something where you feel like you can play around in the draft and find guys much like you did last year is what I'm saying. But ultimately the most intriguing matter for the Rams heading into this offseason is the quarterback situation, right? Because everyone felt like last year when they did pick up a guy like Stetson Bennett, that it was starting to become something that the Rams were beginning to monitor, right? How long Matthew Stafford had left in his career. And this year, I feel like now's a better time than ever to go out in free agency and potentially get someone to learn behind it, because I don't necessarily think Stetson Bennett's going to cut it. Maybe you dip into the well in the draft and a popular name being projected to the Rams, potentially, say, late in round 2, early in round 3, is a guy like Quinn Ewers, who definitely could learn the system a little bit more, and especially under Sean McVay, really develop and mature into a high-level NFL quarterback. But I do feel like there's more options in free agency for this team to really solidify and start to think about this QB situation once Stafford leaves, and especially if it's coming up sooner rather than later. So a bold prediction I could see happening for this Rams team, this isn't completely far-fetched, is that they trade for Kenny Pickett, and I feel like they draft someone so that once Stafford leaves, whether it be at the end of next year, 2 years or so, both Pickett and whoever they draft in this year's draft, whether it be Ewers, Dart, maybe taking a shot at Milrow or something like that, can grow as well. And then Kenny Pickett could be an interesting QB option as a bridge guy if Stafford's retirement is coming sooner rather than later, so that Ewers, Dart, Milrow, whoever, Gabriel even, Howard even, I'm not sure, whatever avenue the Rams decide to take, if they choose to go that route in the draft, can learn more and more. So I think the Rams are in a nice little spot where at least the quarterback position, they have a lot of options available to them. But ultimately, I am concerned about the future of this offensive line more than anything. Because I think that if Alaric Jackson wants to test the waters, which he almost certainly can do, I feel like the Rams won't have enough money to keep him, and they won't want to splash so much cash on him either way. And I feel like that could lead to a lot more fallout amongst other guys like Havenstein, like a guy like Jonah Jackson, who ultimately lost his job this season. So look for the offensive line's future to get a little bit more complicated. But I do still think the sky's the limit for this Rams team. I really like the future of this defense. Maybe if they do go the route of corner, safety, what have you, in this year's draft, they can find a guy that really bolsters the secondary in both units, both the front seven and the secondary will be fascinating for the Rams. But I think that ultimately, if I'm a Rams coach, GM, owner, I'm thinking about what's going to happen with the future of this offensive line, because that could get a little bit worrying. Let me know what you think about the Rams' future in the comments. But coming up next, we transition to the NBA, talking a lot more about that before we transition back to the NFL, doing my midweek NBA power ranking. See you at the top right after this short break.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without